Good evening. Just before I get our panelists up here, I just wanted to give you some background to the session tonight. When I was first approached by the APG Canada to do this session, they said they needed somebody who was neutral, who didn't have a perspective that was particularly pro or against any type of research. And they said, look, you're a brand consultant and you have been running the MBA brand management course at Schulich for the last 10 years. We think that you might be just the right person for us. So I said, well, that'd be great. And of course, I was very excited. I thought it's always nice to have the chance to facilitate a session like this with, so many great people in the industry. And then they told me that, of course, being the APG, after I'd said yes, this is going to be all around communication. And really, the topic is research castrating great work. Now, that was great, and I was still very excited, but my whole brand course is around helping students understand how to build strong brands from the inside out. So if you needed help around, discovering a brand purpose or aligning culture with strategy or your organization with strategy, I'm your right guy. Anyway, I'm a researcher. I work at Schulich, so I thought, no problem, I'll just do some research. I'll tighten up my knowledge on this area, and I'll come prepared. And then about a week ago, I got told, guess what? We're going to have all of the presenters speaking first, because we just wanted to make your job a little bit more challenging. And so they're going to give everybody their points of view, and then we want you to ask some questions. So I said, Michelle, Mark, what do I do? They said, bring your iPad, take some notes as people are speaking, and you'll find your way to the right questions. So I'm going to do my best with that, and I'm going to try to ask some provocative questions, but I do believe that the speakers did a fantastic job, even if they were playing a little bit nice, covering most of the territory. And I think as I call them up, if you could come and join me, if we could give them another round of applause, I think they did an outstanding job. So having just put some of the questions together as they were speaking, just bear with me, I've got them on my iPad here. And this is really a question to the panelists. I'm going to start by asking a bunch of questions. I'm going to get through them. And then what I'm going to ask you, if you can help me with some of the provocative questions you think we haven't quite covered, it might be useful. And if you can keep those questions to the end, we are then going to allow people from the audience the chance to ask some questions, and I'll facilitate some of the responses to that. So the first question to our panelists. It is clear that you all agree that research is not guilty of hindering good work, but rather plays a powerful role in shaping it. So just to warm you up a little, even though you have all made some of this already explicit, at which points in the creative development process do you believe research is most helpful? And although you mostly covered that question, what I'd really like to know, and I think what might be helpful for our guests tonight, is what methodologies are you recommending these days? Anyone would like to start?
You're looking at me.
Emily, I am indeed.
So as I said in the presentation, definitely strategically as where we would recommend and think research is the most effective. We use a bunch of different methodologies. One of my favorite techniques is actually to put consumers out of their normal behavior. So you were talking about snacking, I think. One exercise we did with consumers was we gave them a snack box, but we got them to snack at really weird times of the day, and we gave them weird food to eat at that time of the day, and then they had to write and talk about how they felt about eating chips at 9 o'clock in the morning or at midnight or what have you. Another thing we did was similar kind of thing, but on the deprivation side with television. It was actually with CBC where we got half of the people to watch twice as much television during the week, and then the other half to watch twice less the amount of television, basically no television. And it was just incredible, the stories we heard back. So I love that experimental thing where you get people to do different things. So it's, it's qualitative research. It could be focus groups. It could be, ethnography, but it's asking interesting questions and getting people to do things out of the norm where you find the insight.
Okay, Arielle, thank you.
I agree with that. I think it depends on your objective, and that's where clarifying your objective should ultimately lead to the right methodology. So I don't know if I can actually answer that, but that's where, as mentioned, no silo thinking. If you have your research objective, you should be going to your agency and your planners and saying, hey, this is what we need to figure out. What's the best way to do it? So I tend to lean more towards qual because I think that's where you get a lot of the insight, but it depends on the objective. And there's times when quant is absolutely what you need to answer your question. So I think it depends, if I can say that.
Okay, and the other panelists?
I'd be inclined to agree with that. And we won't agree with everything, don't worry. I know it's a little bit of a fear here.
The audience doesn't want that.
But research, as I said earlier, can't be one size fits all. It really depends on the objective. And, but if there is a trend in research, I see it moving further and further into the beginning of the whole process now, rather than, like I said, being a disaster check. So what improvements, what changes are coming? I think we're finally getting to the point where we can measure implicit associations and we can measure emotion through neuroscience without hooking people up like rats, in a lab and trying to measure it that way. So we're going to now be able to measure a lot more than just what people say in a survey. That's one of the major changes we're seeing. And also quantitative research moving into the early stage. It's not just focus groups. I mean, there's a time for focus groups, there's time for different kinds of qual, but we're seeing more and more methodologies in earlier stages.
Okay.
I think every agency I've ever worked at has had its own kind of proprietary upfront research thing. I mean, FCB, it used to be called Mind and Mood. At Saatchi, it's exploring. And I think that in my view, it's the place where the most time should be spent. Arielle mentioned if we could move that up further, and because it's happened a million times, it's really hard when you are getting a creative brief and you've got 3 weeks for development, and then you look at the post-testing schedule, and it's longer than your creative development schedule, significantly longer. That's really a pain in the ass. And it's hard to accept sometimes. Whereas if you had moved all that up further, gotten really great insights, it would not just maybe give you more time. If we actually use those proprietary research things that agencies are doing up front, if we put more time in those, we just get better briefs up front. We'd have better creative coming out the other end.
Okay, I think that was a general theme from all of your presentations, that research during qualitative, certainly in the development process, in the, trying to discern insight, is where most of you would put your research dollars. And yet it's interesting, I mean, so much of the debate in the industry has really been around the use of quantitative, especially when it comes to pre-testing. This has been a constant theme that has been around for many years. Now, isn't the nub of the pre-test testing question whether any pre-testing system can accurately predict an advertisement's sales effect? We know that it can predict psychological effects, but the question, of course, that has faced the industry is, do those really translate into behavioral effects? And most importantly, for clients who are looking for a real return on investment to actual sales offtakes. On pre-testing norms based on measurements from the 1960s, with no proven correlation with sales effectiveness, what are your thoughts?
I remember reading something recently about the Dow Jones Industrial Average. The Dow Jones Industrial Average, until the last maybe 5 years, was based on things like steel output and hydroelectric output, things that they started measuring in the 1930s when the Depression was going on and Roosevelt needed to get a handle on the economy. And they never changed those until 1998 or something like that. So they're measuring the wrong things. And I don't know where the norms come from. You're in a presentation, and I know they come from somewhere, but
You pull them out.
right. But it's you're looking at going a norm for what, and you're looking at the work that you've just done against a brief which is hopefully has come from a great insight. It's idiosyncratic, based on really great creative, which doesn't feel like it's been done before, and you're putting that up against some sort of bar which comes from everything from the past. And I think it's been touched on in a couple of the presentations, is your ideas need to be looking forward as much as possible, and not necessarily relying on things that have come in the past, because then we're just relying on what we know as opposed to wonderful things where there's new things happening.
Now, I know, Scott, that this really puts you in the hot seat, as it were, and probably the next couple of questions are going to as well. So, I apologize beforehand and hope that you'll forgive me. But do you have any response to that?
I do, and I mean, let's start with the 60s. We weren't around in the 60s. It was the advertising industry doing research back in the 60s. But I would say that pre-testing wouldn't exist if it wasn't extensively validated. And this applies to us, this applies to our competitors, and the amount of work when you do hundreds and of thousands of tests, you have the ability to correlate these results back to in-market performance, which is a solid gold with the client. They're looking for the in-market performance. Their jobs depend on it. The amount of market mix modeling that goes on and finding which, and it's not always the same, but which of the predictive measures have the greatest relation to in-market performance gives the CFO, it gives people in a marketing team the confidence to go forward with this and to go out with great creative. But the fact that it's a black box is hard for me to accept. I mean, we're very transparent about how we evaluate creative, and I think most are in the research industry. But the volumes of validations, I mean, is it 100% all the time? Of course not. But we do trust statistics. That's why we vaccinate our children, and most of us don't smoke anymore. There is strong relation to what happens in markets. So do I believe it's predictive? Absolutely.
Well, as a client, I can say that I actually have not lived that all the time, that you can get work that hits the hurdle, you put it in market, you're like, yes, we got it, and then you just watch nothing happen. Yeah. And it's the worst feeling in the world to have your ad on air and you have bet the house on it and nothing changes from a brand health perspective, from a sales perspective. And yes, there are a lot of other factors that go into it. So I don't want to say that it's the absolute job of advertising to drive sales 100%, and you can't take away everything else that happens, but as it goes both ways. As much as great work that tests well may not drive sales, you can have stuff that tests like crap that does drive sales. And so I think it goes both ways, but in fairness, I would say that there are a lot of times when it doesn't do what it's supposed to do, according to the testing.
Yeah, I think there's nothing as predictable as unpredictable consumer behavior. Time and time again, we see that. I mean, people absolutely lie about a lot of things, and they don't know how they're going to behave, really. And especially when we're pre-testing something that's brand new for them. And they don't, like my Seinfeld example, they don't really know how to respond to it properly because they haven't experienced it. They haven't lived it in the way that it's intended, as we do with these brands, which is not just the 30-second television spot. It's surrounded by so many other pieces that need to be collected and evaluated based on the experience that consumer has with the brand, not just on a one flash read in a collective reel type of format.
Okay, well, these panelists are definitely making my job easy because I'm not even having to ask for the next person to respond. They just do. Thank you very much. No, honestly, please keep this up. It's fantastic. One of the questions that has been asked continuously about pre-testing and the validity of pre-testing, especially when we speak clearly about advertising, is how do we separate that from the influence of the rest of the marketing mix when we're talking about sales effectiveness? And Arielle, you're at Rogers, and so the question that you face, of course, is not just advertising, but customer service. I hope you don't make me making the point, but both need to be improved in order to drive, sales. So going back to the pre-testing question, what are we really testing when it comes to our advertising? Are we testing things that have a direct correlation with sales?
Is that to me?
To any of you.
Well, should I comment on the customer service? We're working on it. I expected some comment or another on customer service. But so the question is, what are we ultimately testing? Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Yes. So given the influence of the rest of the marketing mix, when we talk about pre-testing, and when we think about the variables that we're actually testing, and the norms that we use, how really well are those correlated with an actual sales effect relative to what the rest of the marketing mix may help to influence in terms of sales?
Wow, okay. So at General Mills, actually, we did marketing mix models that tried to tease out all the different elements, obviously, of the marketing dollars spent, as well as sales and trade marketing. And so there you could actually see the impact on sales in terms of lift from the advertising. I haven't, we didn't do that. I haven't done that at other companies. But from a Rogers standpoint, I mean, I don't think we're producing work just for the sake of it. Ultimately, when we're developing work and spending money, whether it's digital, whatever it is, there's a couple of things we're trying to do. A, it's to build our brand equity, and there could be a big road to hoe on that one and a big hill to climb, but building brand equity, and ultimately we do need to drive sales. Like that is, I'm not necessarily judged, and it depends on your company. At Labatt, it was a lot mainly based on brand health, and our targets were around brand health in the marketing department. And brand health may not, the assumption was brand health would lead to sales, but our targets were brand health. At Rogers, it's a little bit different. We do have to drive sales, and so when I'm working with my agency, we're not just trying to build great work for the sake of it. It does need to build a brand and drive sales.
Okay. Does anyone else have a comment to make?
One of the best clients I ever had was a guy named Danny Williams, and he was the Premier of Newfoundland and Labrador. And we launched we launched the tourism campaign about 10 years ago, and he was a wonderful guy. And unlike a lot of, I don't know if whoever has the Tourism Ontario business actually floats it past the Premier before it goes out, but Danny was a businessman and before he got into politics, and he wanted to see all the work. And he told us, he said, go out and do the best job you can and make the ads great, and we'll find the money and build it. Just a great guy. But he was also keenly aware that no matter how good the advertising was, if the people on the other end of the 1-800 number weren't picking up the phones, and if the people who owned the bed and breakfasts in the inns that you were gonna come stay at, if everybody else didn't fulfill the experience, the advertising didn't matter. And I think sometimes it's a great question because in the agency, we're very focused on the advertising, obviously, because that's our part of it. And it's easy to sort of, if you see something fail or not fail in terms of a campaign or sales don't rise, it's really easy to point back at the advertising. There are so many other things that come into play that we can't possibly control. And, I think that, and it's been touched on a little bit, whether or not it's something that's quantifiable, I think for the most part, agencies are really good. Everybody in the agency, whether it's account staff, whether it's planning, whether it's creative, whether it's production, you sort of know from the moment that you see an idea presented to you, that piece is going to work. Like, that's great. That's something special. And, everybody kind of knows that. Even clients know that. You present something, there is usually something that lights up the room. You got to kind of go with that intuitive thing that you're feeling and hope that you get that part of it right, because you can't control the rest of it.
Okay, so let's change the angle of attack just a little bit. Emily, you mentioned that you are seeing a decline in pre-testing generally. But in my experience, there are some clients that just absolutely insist on pre-testing. So my question to the panelists is, why do you think some clients are still stuck on the need for pre-testing? What are the various factors that may be driving this, in your opinion? In your experience?
In my experience, it's usually a global mandated thing that they basically have to test what they're doing in this country. That's many times. It also would be as a result of not feeling, I think, secure about the positioning that's been established with the agency in the marketplace. Selling that through, working that through alongside your client and with the rest of the agency team members so that you're already believing, halfway to creative in where you want to go and what you want to say. Then we just have to work out actually how we're going to say it and where we're going to say it. So then pre-testing, because I think pre-testing a lot of times is strategic pre-testing. It's not just creative pre-testing. And so if that strategy is not exciting, if it's not as motivating as the client thinks it should be, or they're not happy with it basically, then I think then that leads to creative pre-testing, and they're basically testing the strategy and the creative at the same time.
Okay. Arielle?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I would also add that, and I just lost my train of thought. Wow. Homer. I completely just lost my train of thought, so I will turn it over to someone else.
Can I jump in for a second then?
Okay. Scott.
We have to look at it beyond pre-testing as necessary evil, or the clients have to do it, because a lot of clients want to do it. and they want to partner with people on this, because if it's used the right way and if it's used to take an idea from good to great, to really nail that execution and have confidence to go forward with that new campaign, it's money well spent. And it's not a huge investment to make. But just because I spend time in the client role as well, I would just understand that the clients, there are cases, and it's mandated in many cases, and I know that, but in a lot of cases that we see, they really want to do something with this, and they want constant improvement in the work that's going out the door. So it's a mix.
Okay.
I have my thought back.
Excellent.
So the danger comes when pre-testing is used as the bad guy. So when no one has the guts to say what is on the table is average, and instead it's the let's just test it syndrome. And I have seen that on more occasions than I think I've been part of that too, where you have ideas that people fight very hard for and they're pretty average. And rather than say we're not doing it and we're going to miss our timeline or we're going to create some stress on the team, we test it. And then 8 weeks later, or 6 weeks if you rush your copy testing, 6 weeks later you're back where you started because it was average work that tested very averagely. And so oftentimes I think copy testing and pre-testing is used for political reasons, and it's used to play the bad guy because no one steps up to the plate and says we're not going to do this.
Yeah, to that point, there are places where testing is it's cultural. It's actually been built into the way the organization has worked for decades and decades. And we don't need even, we know the clients. Like you go, oh yeah, those guys test everything. Doesn't matter what it is, it's tested the same way, everything, which is a terrible way, because I think I touched on this a little bit. You can actually start thinking that way, and you can actually start bending your work that way, and you can game the system a little bit and go, oh yeah, if we just do this, 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 and this, you'll get a great score. But it might be just shitty work. And who wants that? So in some places it's just part of the deal, and all the folks on the client side have grown up from junior brand people all the way up to the executive offices, believing that this is what we do, so this is what we do, as opposed to really thinking about what are our objectives, what's the creative like, what are the methodologies we should be using, etc.
Okay, and thank you very much. I don't want to turn this all into a discussion just on pre-testing. But it is central to much of what we talk about tonight. So one last question in this area. It's my experience through my career that too many clients use pre-testing as a go, no-go. They don't actually use it as part of the creative improvement process. I'm interested in what your various experiences are in this regard.
Can I go first? I think for me that was much more the case in the first half of my career. That if there were clients who tested, that's how they tested. Some of the clients didn't test at all. The ones who did, it was you put a couple of ads into research, which one came out on top, that's what went. I think there's been a real change in that over the last 10 years. And most of it is not about cutting heads between different spots. It's much more about optimizing, which seems to be the trend.
Okay. Anybody else?
I would agree, but it does seem still that there's a go, no go factor in there. If it's, I've been there, and when it just doesn't work, you try to take your learnings, but invariably, rather than optimize, somehow we're back at the drawing board. So it shouldn't be like that, but I've seen it too often. But in the good sense, when it is used for optimization, and you learn what you can improve and you tweak it, but we don't test it again, and you just hope that the tweaks worked. And so that's where it kind of breaks down in the process.
I think where our clients are right now is what we're trying to figure out is what's the total package working in the marketplace, which is now done in measurement, not so much pre-testing. You talked actually about sales and whether or not advertising was directly related to sales. We're now doing that with a lot of effective measurement, digital in particular, and we're spending a ton of time in market figuring out what's right and wrong. And what's so great about this new world of communication and this new relationship that we're building with clients is we can on the go change the discussion as need be, change the communication as need be. And I think that's really where we should be focusing our time and effort, because we can actually make the change happen and make all of our work much more effective and spend less time doing pre-testing up front.
Okay, and you've probably had enough time on the hot seat, Scott. So I'm going to move on here just a little bit, I think, just to be fair. Okay, Brian, both in your presentation and Emily now, you've spoken about the evolving media landscape. Increasingly, clients no longer buy just advertising. Brands come to market through a complex network of communication channels, and client budgeting practices are quickly evolving to reflect this new reality. In many companies, they've already evolved. What are the implications of these changes on traditional research methodologies used in the creative development process and in pre-testing? Like, what do you see as some of the changes going on, besides the real-time effect of learning?
I mean, we touched on it a bit. Nothing else gets researched except for TV. So as we move away from, in terms of copy testing, as we move away from that, research companies are going to have to, and all the analytics companies are going to have to find ways to measure that stuff if that's what's required. Some of it's less measurable, and some of it measures in real time. And it's actually, I mean, everybody knows this. It's actually an amazing time to be doing what we're doing, because for those of us who've been doing it for a while, where TV, print, radio have been the traditional media, now there's so many other things that we're able to play with and find great ways to express the brand. It should be just as exciting for, if you're following research, there have to be just as many exciting things coming up to give us new insights, to give us new kind of ways to understand how the marketing mix is affecting consumers.
Okay, Scott?
Yeah, if I can build on that. I mean, our industry, like your industry, I'm saying you, but for various people here, it's going to follow the money. And the investment in innovation is really focused on how the media landscape is changing right now. And it's ways to measure social, which you were talking about earlier, digital, and I hate to say even pre-testing digital, but it's changed. What we're going to see in 5 years from now is not going to be traditional television testing. It'll always be there. It'll exist as long as TV does. But I see more and more emphasis moving away from that. And as clients start to ask the questions that they ask now of TV, you'll start to see more invest in the client side there as well. So, I mean, I would say absolutely it's changing, and the innovation is following, and a lot of it's out there now, but we don't have those dialogues with our clients yet.
Okay, I'm going to go on to the last question. I've just been shown the 2-minute warning. And I'm really going to deal with half of it. I'm not going to deal with the first part on qualitative. But the field of research has seen the introduction of many new qualitative and quantitative research methodologies to support the creative development process and pre-testing. So thinking about quantitative research for the moment, what's the way forward here? What might be learned from advances in fields of physiological measurement and neuroscience that might be helpful in shaping great work? Emily, this is for you, this question.
I'm not answering this question.
I told her I was going to ask this one, but I just
That's a
told her just
fascinating
as she
topic,
arrived
Ashley.
here. So how might these contribute to advances in pre-testing, for instance?
I'm sorry, I wasn't listening.
Yeah, she did tell me that she was going to tune out.
Arthur told me to say that's a fascinating topic, Ashley.
Okay. So has anybody got any comment they'd like to make about physiological testing or neuroscience and the impact of that on quantitative testing and pre-testing in particular? Or is this way too academic?
No comment.
No comment.
I mean, it's interesting.
It's interesting.
I mean, but.
I touched on it earlier. Scary. We can't wire people up like rats to try to evaluate creative and how they feel about brands. I completely disagree with that. And this is somebody that used to wire people up to measure eye movement on a gum rack in 1/200th of a second for success. Yeah, we do that, but no, it's there are better ways to start to integrate more and more of the emotion into how we test research and to give you that feedback. But like I said, it's things like webcams, and it's different ways to measure implicit associations. And I think that's going to play, along with any passive data collection we can pick up, a much greater role and a lot less of the ask and answer type research in the future.
Okay, now some might say that we have been pre-testing for the last 50 years in environments that don't really mirror the actual marketplace. So aren't these new advances just new ways to do exactly the same thing? We're testing in environments that aren't real, hoping to learn something that can help us in the real world?
That's some heavy stuff.
Well, I mean, the one
Michelle told me to bring it on.
the one good thing about it, if it worked, would be, you know, that we're trying to tap into people's emotional responses and giving them less opportunity to have that rational answer, that probably somewhat lying answer, or them telling you the answer that they think that you want to hear, or for them to finish the survey really quickly. So, you know, in that regard, if we can ask people questions without them knowing what we're actually asking them, then we might get some interesting answers that way.
Any other comments? Yes, Scott?
Really quick. I mean, I think technology is getting us over that hurdle, and absolutely that would have been the case back in the 80s, maybe some of the 90s with research, but the fact that people are doing research on their tablets, their phones, the same way that they're consuming advertising, is getting closer and closer to the source now. So it's less artificial.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so I think what we've seen from our panelists tonight is that there is definitely a clear agreement from all of them, including Scott, that research can very powerfully help the development of creative. I think what we've also heard from all of our panelists is that the research that is most helpful is that is used to discern insight and is heavily weighted to the front end of the process. Though Scott may not quite agree with that statement, one of the valuable things that I think we've also learned today is that pre-testing is not always about the go, no-go decision. For instance, Brian indicated that he's seen a greater movement towards pre-testing specifically being used more in the process of helping with creative modification to try and ensure that we get better work out at the end. I'd like to thank the panelists. I think you did a fantastic job. You certainly helped to facilitate with me the session. Thank you very much. Okay, so I just wanted to thank them for helping me facilitate so far, but now we're going to open up questions to you. Do we have any speakers? Mics? Any mics? Thanks, guys. You really helped me so really long.
Hi, sorry. So this
Can we just have quiet, please, in the room, just so we can hear the questions?
Shush. So this is touching on something that Brian said earlier about we've built in emotion into the model that we're going to test, and being a relatively young planner, and we talked a bit about testing digital, and without getting into too many specific methodologies, I kind of wanted to get your gut opinion, for lack of a better term, on when we're testing digital. Sometimes it's easy for, I would say, client perception, or even maybe even the moderator's perception, to look at these different digital and social ads and see them through the lens in which we would normally see a TV ad or a billboard, and kind of have everyone in the room evaluate or react to these ideas, not as they would live in the digital space or not as they would live in a social space, but rather as they would live as stagnant or kind of dead units. So I wanted to get, the opinion of whoever on the panel, but this is mostly directed to Scott and Arielle. But how do you think that formal research is going to be addressing this, or is this addressing this, in the short term and in the long term, without getting into, the specific models available?
Okay. For digital, just really quickly, one of the ways that that our companies approach this is using more cookie-based research. I mean, it's not, I can't speak to, maybe when you should speak to the pitching and the challenges, bring this to life for the client, because we're not in that part of the process. We're at the end when it's being measured. And that's how we'd approach it, using cookie-based methodologies, where we can compare a true test and control cell and understand this has influenced people's opinions of the brand in the intended way. I mean, that goes back to the 60s and how a lot of television advertising was tested. But when we do it this way, we're not basing everything on questions. We're basing it on the opportunity to see the ad and how well it's breaking through. That's one approach. Now, it's gone a lot further, and there's much more passive measurement that's happening as well, and the advancements in social, and it includes a lot of partnerships with the Twitters of the world and others to get there. But it's I think that it's underdeveloped in Canada. I don't think we're putting as much emphasis on it as south of the border, but its time's coming, and the methodologies are ready. It's just a matter of adopting more of them. Does that answer your question?
Emily, you got a response?
I'm just not sure if we need a new methodology for that. I mean, we can measure how people react to social media campaigns with, the basic tools that we have out there right now in real time. As I mentioned before, I'm not sure pre-testing is necessary for that. As I also mentioned before, we have norms, all our own norms, all our own case studies, other social media campaigns that we've been doing for years now. It's not some new thing. What's worked, what hasn't worked with certain targets, what other social media campaigns around the world have worked. They're all there for the taking and for the learning that can really point us in the right direction.
Okay.
And the only thing I would add is the beauty of digital and social is it is real time and you can change it at a pretty low cost. And so unlike TV where you don't want to invest heavily in production before you know, and that's part of the reason I think pre-testing is there, digital you can change, and there's cost, but it's just not as cost intensive as TV.
Right. It's not as expensive. Do you have another question? I see a couple of hands up.
Hi, my name is Paul Leone. I'm Director of Strategy at COSET, overseeing McDonald's. 3 quick disclaimers before I get to my observations. It's actually not a question, but one is I am a bit tipsy. Second one, I'm a bit frustrated that the whole conversation evolved around pre-testing, which is not I don't think it's encompass everything that the planners here want to see. And third is, these are my personal opinions. They don't reflect my agency's or my client's point of view.
Here it comes.
Here it comes. So no, because I find it interesting that you talk about the unique opportunity to have like so many planners, some of the best most brilliant minds in Toronto here concentrated in this room, and I was surprised not to see we talk about two things: the quality of the research that is applied, because I think we're talking about research in a very generic term, and I think it comes down to applying great research skills. I think, Emily, you talk a little bit about that. It's not just about research. It's about applying like smart research methodology. And the second one is the quality of the people who review the research finding. And that's where I would point out to like the planners and the clients and all the people that are actually getting access to the research to make the most of it. So I'm sorry, Scott, with all due respect, the example that you used about the 7-Up, I was personally a little bit disappointed because, if anything, I just thought it was like perfect example of when the research company just kind of gave it to the client and say, okay, let's get a little bit more branding in the advertising and put the 7-Up logo in the middle of the spot, revealing like killing the creative spot and giving them what they need to hear. I think it's understandable for us to see like clients like having appetite for more research, because more than ever it's a world where it's very hard to navigate, very hard to understand with all the technology that is in front of us, to understand like how you get to connect with clients. So I can see why their appetite for greater research, but I think it's up to the research companies and the agencies to actually come together and be smart about how we apply research to get the clients to, again, help them navigate for this increasingly challenging world. So, again, I'm sorry, but I have to say that that's not the best example on how to best apply research. And then let's talk about the quality of the people who use research, which is
All right, I'm going to stop you there. No, I'm going to stop you there just for a moment. No, because I think I've heard your question, and I'm actually going to put it to the panelists.
Please do so, because I think we need to be more accountable.
The way that I heard this question is, would it have been useful for us to talk about, and perhaps we can now, the general quality of research that we are doing and that maybe clients are buying? In other words, how far are we really pushing the envelope, trying to do new things generally, and maybe how knowledgeable are we in working with our clients, and are our clients in working with us in a way that allows us to push maybe the frontiers of what we do through research to aid creative development. Any comments?
Sorry, and just before we go through that, can you guys in the back? It's really hard to hear. So if you want to stay and listen, that's awesome. Otherwise,
but we'd like you to stand, listen, please. Drinks are afterwards. Okay.
What was the question?
Oh my God, I can't remember the question.
I'm still recovering from the
so
question.
the question was about the quality of research that we do in general. To what degree, because that's really, I think, what I heard, in the question was, are we pushing the boundaries hard enough as an industry? Are clients knowledgeable enough in that they ask us to push the boundaries? I mean, if we were to go back to the pre-testing question, I mean, one of the issues that I have, having worked both client side and agency side, and now as a consultant, is how knowledgeable about clients, about what we're really testing when we pre-test, and how does that really relate to the sales effectiveness, for instance. But taking us out of that box now, just talking about research, qualitative, quantitative, anything, are we really pushing the boundaries as hard as we should be within Canada, within the profession of marketing?
I'll speak to qualitative, I think, on this one. I would say we've done a lot of interesting things. I talked about experimentation before. I actually talked about research companies being as creative as the creators of ideas themselves. So I think there's room to grow. There always is. We should always be looking for the new, the next, the never been done before. You'll remember that line from our new PC campaign.
Little advertisement in there, yeah.
It's a little plug. Qualitatively, I think I've worked globally in qualitative research, and I think we have some of the best moderators in this country. And we have, with them as an agency and with our clients, developed very interesting ways of talking to consumers. I mentioned experimentation. There's all different kinds of ethnography which can be done so easily now through digital assets and communication. We push the boundaries in crowdsourcing information and trends around the world, which is a qualitative piece that really fuels all the planners in the room. That's what that information is there for. But I think it's up to all of us collectively as a group. We are planners. We are supposed to be strategic explorers. We're supposed to be consumer insight advocate nut bars. So we should be out there shopping like our consumers, not shopping like our consumers, doing many different things to uncover new ways to talk to them and find information that are going to build our brands for our clients.
Great. Arielle, just a disclaimer, I worked for Nestle too at some stage. Oh. So I was actually going to ask you if you could take this question because of your international experience, because you might be able to bring some perspective of in Canada versus outside Canada.
Okay, I'll come back to that. I just want to add on to what Emily said, because I agree with that. But I also think the onus is on, you get the research results back and then they get filed away in a drawer or on the computer on a shared drive. And we don't use the results. We use them for the week or two after, and invariably, depending on the research that's done, they get forgotten. And so how do we take this great learning that we have and continually use it to inform our insight? And then you get new teams that come on, and there's this not invented here syndrome. Oh, I wasn't involved in that research, so I'm just going to do it again. And I think that's where there's an opportunity to improve, not necessarily the quality of the research, but how we actually use the learnings that we get from it.
Super, thank you. Are there any other questions? And I'm going to ask, if you don't mind, could they be one-part questions? Just to help with the flow here so we can get a number of questions in, if you wouldn't mind, okay?
One-part question, okay. I might be totally alone in this, and maybe Mark Tomlin will be the only one because he's pretty sassy too, but am I the only one who wants to call bullshit on the whole kind of, it's an easy answer, and we just use pre-testing at the beginning, and we can kind of make it all work? Because it just all sounds so easy, and it's not. It's not easy at all. And to totally make a typical situation, we do some insights at the beginning, but the insights get watered down. Oftentimes, clients and planners trying to fight about that. Creatives don't get resourced, or they get less time, and we kind of water that down. And then research, we have trouble kind of, what do we do with the research insights? Let's make a weak idea a little bit stronger. But at the end of the day, just a lot of average work, you said it yourself, is getting into market. And how are we as a system changing that perspective? Because I just think we've made it sound so easy tonight, and that's awesome that you all feel the same way, but how are we fixing this system that's broken?
Well, I mean, Middle East peace is real easy. Just have everybody stop killing each other and hating each other, right? It's an easy solution. It's really hard to implement because, and it's the same thing with research, we're dealing with generations of the way research has been used. We're dealing with ingrained cultures that research with some clients, with some agencies, et cetera, where research is built in because it's part of the flow chart, right? So, you know, the answer is easy. Yeah, sure, just change everything. But of course, it's incremental. And my feeling, though, is that you are going to start seeing radical change in the way that things are marketed in very short order, because the work that is cutting through, the work that is getting to people, really getting to people, is not the work that got to people 10 years ago. And it is largely resistant to the kind of research that we're doing now. And that's changing all of our processes. Like whether we like it or not, we can, the most powerful thing that's going on is just the absolute velocity of what's happening with I mean, I can't stress it enough. Every quarter, there's another way to get to consumers that we have to relearn. Every year, there's a major thing that we have to relearn now. That velocity of change didn't exist in the past, and it's going to mean that we're going to have to be more nimble. Whether we're trying to change it or not, it's just forcing us to. That's why I think it's great. It's going to force the researchers to be more nimble. It's going to force the planners to be more nimble. It's going to force the clients to kind of go with, yeah, we're going to have to try that over there because that's where everybody is, and we know there's power over there. We don't know how to test that. So I think that whether we want to change things or not, and I think everybody agrees, you're right, we'd like to, it's just going to be forced on us. And I think that's fantastic.
Does anyone else have a strong point of view they want to put across? Thank you very much for that. Huh? Okay, let's take another question. Okay, over to you.
So one of the questions
We can hear you clearly. So.
You're nice and loud.
Okay, I'll be loud. One of the questions I tend to ask myself is, how did Millward Brown come to exist? And I tend to always think about how people think God exists. There's a story of a caveman walking through his cave. He looks out of the forest where he gets all his food. And all of a sudden a lightning bolt comes out of the sky and lights the forest on fire and burns it all to the ground. And he's scared, like, where am I going to get my food from? And someone says, well, that's God. You got to make God happy by offering him a sacrifice. And so it kind of reminds me of why the fear that kind of leads to why we test research. And so, you know, kind of is what's the answer? Only one person really understands the answer. It's this priest that tells you, I know what God's thinking. I know what makes God happy. All you got to do is X, Y, and Z. And so my question, I guess for Scott is, when are you going to hire a creative team and put us all out of business?
We have people putting up some hands over here, but that's it's an interesting analogy, and I haven't heard God used in that sense before. But it's and
I love it when you bring the lightning.
Yeah, we try not to hit the lightning too much, but you know, the two of them tie together a little bit, I think, and you know, I have to say that at least in my research agency, and I'd say most of the researchers I know, that nobody's gunning for your job. I mean, this is not something that we have in our skill set to do. This is not something that we would attempt to do because we can't. But we know what we can do, and it's to give some of that voice of the consumer, that guidance back into it. And so, I mean, are we going to hire a creative agency and try to put it about business? No. But, and are we going to have a quick fix on all this? No. Maybe some of these tensions, and I've had a little bit coming my way here tonight, but maybe some of this tension is healthy and it keeps us all in check, and maybe that's the roles in the future. It's a hard one to answer, but...
You know, maybe it goes back to what gets measured, gets managed, and all of that thinking that comes out of MBA schools, sadly. Because the one thing we can't teach at business school, of course, is the creativity behind business, the ingenuity. If we could help every MBA, you know, who works, you know, on the client side, become an expert business person, everyone would be wealthy. So it really does go back to what I think a lot of what Emily was speaking about earlier, which is this difference between the innate feeling that we have that something is right, and then trying to prove it on metrics that maybe we can't actually tie back to exactly, is it going to be right in the marketplace? Do we have another question? Yep. I think you need a mic because they won't hear you at the back. And, well, they won't hear you at the back, so unless you speak more loudly.
So we seem to be talking about research as metrics and data and measurement, and then we throw the word qual in there, and we throw the word consumer in there. And I think when I joined Millward Brown, trust me, it took me a long time to join because you were all about metrics. And you were all about data, and it all made sense, but not to people like me who are from qual and strategy. And I think one of the things that we haven't really been talking about a lot tonight is Stengel said the consumer's king. And one of the things that qualitative research does is bring the consumer to the table. You've got your agency, which is about the creative. You've got your client, which is about their brand. And when you actually invite the consumer to the table, I started to think about the question that, do we, what is it, castrate creative? I don't think I've used that word publicly, but do we castrate creative? And I was saying to Scott earlier, I thought about it a lot. And to me, that's akin to, does your doctor give you cancer when he diagnoses you? Some people may think yes. I think no. And the earlier you go to your doctor, and the sooner you bring your doctor into the conversation, the sooner he can point out precursors. Precursors that will do you wrong later. Not because he wants to make your life hell and have you stop eating certain things or stop smoking, because for whatever reason, he's discovered those precursors, and you have the choice if you want to listen or not. But if we believe the consumer's king, how can the consumer castrate good creative? That's my question. How can the consumer castrate good creative? So when we go into qualitative, we're never testing creative.
Okay, I'm going to, Brian, do you want to take a shot at that?
I don't think that, I mean, saying the consumers castrate creative, one of the things, the voice of the consumer is obviously critical. And we've talked about the rate, you know, where you find that. Do you find it for insight or do you find it for measurement afterwards? But I think a lot of people would agree that the way that we use testing, we're testing so we can have incremental change. We can have increment, so you know what, we're going to take it from here to here, from here to here, from here to here, from here to here. The kind of work, whether it's a planning, like a brief, whether it's a product, whether it's a piece of advertising, the stuff that we kind of can point to historically through the years to go, wow, that changed everything, that moved everything, etc. That's the kind of stuff that wasn't incremental, where sometimes we had to, there was an idea that was so great that it had to move past where the consumer was and what they knew. So I don't think it's fair to kind of say that it's consumers who are castrating, such a hard word to use.
You guys have that word. Does research castrate? Well, research is the consumer's voice.
Well, research is comprised of a bunch of different ways of using the consumer's voice. And I think that's been part of what we've been trying to get at tonight. Are we always using the consumer's voice the right way for the right reasons? Has anyone else got a question? Can we get a mic over here, please?
Thank you. And I actually just have a question, not a story, so be really short. Actually, this is for Emily. Emily, you mentioned that at John Street, a lot of your clients actually don't do pre-testing. How did you do that?
I forced them. No. It's something that's happened over the years. As I mentioned, where we do a lot of our research, and I wouldn't call it testing, but our research is in the strategic phase. And we like to think, and we strive to make our strategies as creative as the creative itself. And our strategies actually in and of themselves end up being sort of halfway between a creative idea and a strategy on a page. So we're already getting at things like tone and manner and kind of what we're going to represent in the marketplace, those kinds of things. And we use consumers in terms of validation, exploratory, to explore several creative strategic areas. So by the time we get to creative development and sharing work with clients, we're all on the same team. They've been part of that strategic development with us. They've been at the groups. They've listened to consumers kind of vet those strategic ideas. And when they finally see the creative presentation, and I would think, based on my previous experience at other agencies, our sell-through rate in creative is very high. We don't do the second round, third round, fourth round, because everybody is so aligned and so excited about seeing that strategy come to life. It really becomes a discipline in exploring how creatively we can bring that to life. And then it almost ends up being more difficult to choose versus definitely what to kill. And so it really is that discipline of hard work, and we take a long time. That's not like a week kind of process where you're just grabbing a few insights from somewhere, writing a brief and briefing a creative team. That's weeks of exploratory, sounding out those ideas, vetting out those ideas, and then we just really increase those odds of that creative selling through.
Thank you, Emily. Okay, we've got time for one more question. And I'm going to ask if anybody's got a question that they would like to ask, can they try and push us to maybe a place we haven't yet been this evening? All of the questions have been great so far, but let's push the envelope.
I'm Zeb. I'm from Anomaly. A question that I have, and I think the distinction in the question that we started with was about great work. And I think this is fundamental to what all of us strive for. And it's something that a lot of the old school guys, I don't know if everyone's seen Art and Copy, where they talk about advertising as art. And the job that we do has the potential at its best to move culture and move people to feel something and do something. The thing that we are all here trying to do is move people to action, whatever that action is. And I think potentially what gets lost in all this is the fact that this is art in the aid of commerce. And I think the commerce side is the side that starts to pull us towards numbers and all this other stuff. And I think the question for the group, and I think Emily was onto something with intuition. I mean, the fact of the matter is that artists use intuition. Artists use insight. They're looking at what they see in the world, and they're interpreting it and trying to get us to feel something and do something and respond. And I just wonder, do we lose that when we start to measure it with numbers? Do we lose the art that we all that all drew us to this business when we try and quantify the response to art? One of the guys, George Lois, was talking about Toulouse-Lautrec and his great work that is now hanging in galleries all around the world. I mean, really, the guy was just trying to get people in there to drink at the Moulin Rouge. And this is his story, not mine. I don't want to take credit. But I think ultimately, when done well, what we do is art. And so I wonder, in the act of testing, in the act of pulling it down to the rational, do we lose the ability to transcend?
Do we have a response?
That's some more heavy stuff.
He'll need a drink after that.
It's actually a great question. And I mean, I went to art school, I went to the Ontario College of Art, and they didn't teach you about research. They taught you about advertising, they taught you about art, they taught you about, pulling things out of yourself that means something that you can convey to other people. And I think for a lot of creative folks, ultimately, you're working with a brief, but what you're bringing to it is your own, great creative people, you're bringing your own artistry, your own experience to bear on a brief so that there's something that you have that you can find a way to make that happen. And make it happen in a really beautiful, wonderful way. You raise a great point. There's something in our statement, is it castrating great creative? And I think that great creative, really wonderful creative, can get through a lot of research. But I think a lot of great creative, I've been around the table a lot of times when everybody knows, wow, we've got something awesome here. The client knows, the agency knows, we've got something great here. And sometimes you don't go to testing. Sometimes you do, and it still goes through. I think a lot of what we're talking about where work gets beaten up in testing is when it isn't great to begin with. There's a lot of kind of middling work that goes into test. I mean, Arielle, you mentioned this as well, that it goes into groups and it comes out, it sort of limps out of the focus group. It probably wasn't that great to get in there in the beginning. So that's a great question. Is it measurable? It probably actually is. I think that, there's a lot of things emotionally that we can measure, but, we've seen a few words here tonight: gut, intuition, judgment. We are paid to have those things, all of us collectively, our clients as well. So we should never put those in our back pocket and just listen to the numbers.
Anyone else? Comment?
Yeah, quickly. I mean, you raise great points about the art, and I'm an arts major too, and understand and believe in the role of creativity. I think the challenges that everybody faces is that the client isn't always buying art. The client, you laid it out yourself, the client is trying to drive a commercial effort. And so this is art for commercial sake. That's what pays the bills for all of us and why we have food on the table. And when there is the ability to build confidence through the numbers, I think that can help along the way. And I think the clients need to see it sometimes too. So, would the world be more creative if we didn't? Of course. But would advertising exist without the ability to show its impact, and often through research? I don't think so.
Okay, so thank you.
I just add one thing.
I didn't see you snuck in there.
I put this out to everybody. A lot of the best work in this country comes from small clients. And why is that? I think we all know why that is because smaller clients are willing to take bigger risks because they don't have a lot of money to spend in the first place. They trust their agencies to do what's right for whatever reason. I'm not sure if that's just because of the size or because of the intimate relationship you can end up having with the small clients when you're only dealing with 2 or 3 people in an organization versus hundreds of peoples and multi-layers of approval and process and all that kind of thing. And so I think the answer is yes. I think research can absolutely inhibit the potential to create great ideas if used incorrectly. And, if we're willing to take risks together based on that sound intuition and those norms that I was talking about being my one partner would say, based on our whole life of experience, then, I think we can do amazing things.
Okay, thank you very much. So, look, I think, just to sum up quickly, in terms of what we've heard here tonight, I think, from the panelists, we've definitely heard that research, the thought that research can help support great creative, get us to great creative, is definitely something that is near and dear to everybody's heart. One of the other things that I think we should take away from this, though, is that this continuing kind of a dissonance between, using quantitative research for pre-testing and whether, the exact measurements that we do and the normative standards are helpful always. Maybe there is still some dissonance in the industry about that. But I think we also heard very clearly, and we heard this from Scott too, that the thing that we're really faced with in the industry is just how much change there is in the media landscape itself. And that change is going to have to force new thinking on all of us in terms of what constitutes the types of research that we should be using today and that we're going to use increasingly in the future. As Brian said, so much of our research is going to be, we're going to learn as we do. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't be researching at the beginning of creative and that we shouldn't be finding some way to do pre-testing, maybe to help improve creative. But the media landscape itself is going to change the way also that we think about creative. When I started tonight, I thought that this would be a very daunting task. And I must admit, it has not been. And so my thanks should go for that to our panelists, but then to all of you, because a discussion like this would never be very fruitful or never be very illuminating unless we had great panelists and unless we had some great questions also from you in the audience. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.